I think we have a lot of preconceptions and biases around language. Like if we have challenged a lot of our racial biases, our gender biases, our class biases, language is tied up in all of that. The bias that we have all been raised with by our educational system, by the cultural groups we're in, that's something that we can really interrogate, and it can help make a more inclusive world.
We are joined by Ahmed. Did I get it right? Yes, Ahmed.
Yeah.
Ahmed?
Yeah.
Ahmed.
No,
Okay.
no, the first one is better. I would say Ahmed, but
Ahmed.
there you go. You got it.
Thank you. Sorry.
I appreciate No, don't apologize. It's not intuitive if you don't know the name, how I pronounce it.
Ahmed, Ahmed Ali Akbar, who is is an award-winning journalist and was recently announced as the host of Radiolingo, which is a new podcast from Crooked Media and Duolingo, the language app.
That's right.
Ahmed previously hosted a podcast for BuzzFeed around culture and specifically Muslim culture. And he has done a lot of other things that have gone on to be a successful journalist in his own right. Before that and during that, he is also a highly ranked Project M player and Project Plus player in the
Let's go, baby.
New York, New Jersey community, as well as a commentator. And so we felt he was a perfect guest with the announcement of his new show. Perfect time to get him on, talk about food, talk about culture, talk about how kind of all these things intersect with one another, and gaming, which is part of his heritage and background as a professional. So how you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for that amazing intro, Jacob. Nice to talk to you. I think I would never call myself a top player. I would just say I'm just a commentator. So, I'll take it. I'll hold it in my heart. But the real ones know that I have a lot of losses on my record.
Yeah, but the thing is what we were saying before the show started is that this is the region you're in, New York, New Jersey, is a very competitive region. Compared to I now live in Texas and have been around sort of the DFW PM community, and like that used to also be very competitive once upon a time as well. So I think someone who makes the tier list in those regions deserves their due and respect. So hats off to you for that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I will always hold that as a success in my flirtation with competitive gaming, which, by the way, I've been really interested in it since the early 2000s. I have been in the world of competitive gaming before there was YouTube. I was downloading things on like Kazaa, maybe, I don't know, like Evo Moment 37. I was downloading that on like file sharing apps. So I'm a real old head.
When you first got into that, did you foresee? I mean, obviously you did commentary work. I went back before this episode and watched some of your commentary work as well. I have to say it's pretty good, especially as someone who tried to dabble in Smash commentary myself before I went on to be a games journalist. I ultimately very much respect that. And so did you foresee competitive gaming being your full-time career before you started down your current path?
I think it was a bit of a dream, just kind of like kids wanted to be basketball stars. Like that was never that was not in my future, any sort of athletics. But I was I was a teenager going to the arcade, and I realized there were some people that were just way better than me, and I thought I was pretty good. They were so good. They were doing infinites and stuff on me in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So that got me into the competitive world. I did it was like a dream. It was like, yeah, I want to go to Evo and I want to be on the stage. I don't know what that means or whether there's a career in it, but it was certainly something that I really still in my heart of hearts. I'm like, one day I'll spend a year grinding and I'll make it to grand finals of a national. So it's kind of like anybody who's into a competitive thing, you get bit by the bug, and it kind of, you either have to accept it or you just let it keep infecting you. And I have been thinking about it since that moment in the arcade when somebody was just so much better than me at Marvel vs. Capcom 2. As a career, once I started commentating, I was doing Project M, which is, as you may know, a controversial game because it's a mod. So I did it out of love of the game. I know I see a lot of people who do commentating for a career move. It was never a career move for
Mm.
me. If I had wanted to do a career move, I would have commentated fighting games, which were my original love. But I was just like really charmed by the Project M community. I had a lot of family in that community, so that's the community that I ended up commentating for. But it wasn't because it was a career for me. It was out of the joy.
And for those maybe unfamiliar with Project M, I'll explain basically because some of our audio on demand listeners may not be familiar with the mod itself. Project M is a modified version of Super Smash Bros. Brawl to make it not completely, but somewhat more similar to the mechanics of Super Smash Bros. Melee, which is considered by the community a more what's the word? More better game, better built game. There are a lot of issues that Super Smash Bros. Brawl had. A lot of players had with Super Smash Bros. Brawl, so the community sort of rallied around. Go ahead.
Let's say more competitive game, I think was kind of the intention. They were trying to modify it to be
Sure.
a more consistently competitive game.
Sure. So there were parts of Brawl, tripping, etc., that made it somewhat uncompetitive, and I think partly intentional. And given that Melee had this massive community of its own, even at that time, it was still pretty. It was one of the bigger esports in its heyday. I would still say it. We talk a lot to a lot of people on the show that's their entry point into esports is Melee. Yeah. That, you know, whether it be as children or whatever it may be, live streams, YouTube, however they get into it. There are a lot of people that have sort of Smash tangential parts of their lives. And so Project M was created to modify Super Smash Bros. Brawl to be closer. And then eventually it got even further in depth. They were putting characters into the game that had existed in other versions of the title, but also characters that had never existed in the Super Smash Bros. Franchise. I'll never forget, and I mentioned this to Alpharad last week, that I was at Forte 3 here in Austin in late 2015, and I got to play an unreleased version of PM before it got killed. They never released this, where Knuckles was a part of the game, like from the Sonic franchise. And so this community mod was very popular, and ultimately its death nail was, and I'll say this as somebody who's not speculating and has seen some of the letters, its ultimate death nail was a cease and desist from Nintendo themselves for modifying their IP, and the game shut down. So,
well, I have some news for you.
Sure.
Knuckles is in the game now. Officially,
Yes.
he is in the game. Like they played it. Project Plus was kind of a revival of Project M, and he's the only character they added to the game. He is very well developed, honestly, in terms of feeling like Knuckles. He's also kind of a pain in the butt to fight, but that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So
go ahead.
I was going to say Project Plus is now the newer version of that. The other people picked up where the Project M developers left off.
Right.
A lot of Project M developers went on to work at other companies and be very successful game developers in their own right. So I've met some of those people in their new jobs that worked on the PM dev team. So hats off to them. So I want to talk about, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth here a little bit, but everybody has a passion that in some way influences their career, and broadcasting was your passion, right? Commentating was a passion of yours, as you were talking about, and you went on to be sort of a multimedia presenter in journalism, whether that be the podcast that you had previously done with BuzzFeed, the podcast that you're doing now with Crooked and Duolingo. How do you think that the commentary work that you were doing as a passion project has influenced your ability to deliver that type of content successfully?
That's a great question. I mean, I will say that I started as a commentator before as a journalist, 2013, I think, or 2012 maybe, was around when I started jumping on the mic. I think 2013. And I didn't start being a journalist until like probably a year and a half later. I picked it up on the job at BuzzFeed. There's kind of like I would say there's two passions for me. One is to write. I'm a writer, but that's like one of the things that I've always been passionate about. But the other is to communicate and connect with people. And to me, that's never been like a particular format. It's like whatever is the thing where you can make meaningful connections. So I was making meaningful connections through commentary. I felt that there was a void perhaps in the Project M commentary at the time, that like we could tell better stories because it was a very interesting thing, this modded underground community. So I kind of put in the hours there, and I think it's like with anything, just putting in the grinding time is really important. And it's really funny because I look back at my 2016 podcast when it was released, and I cringe because it's like, so I've developed so much as a presenter since then. I've become more comfortable as well. I'm like less insecure. I kind of just present myself as I want to be seen and how I feel is natural to me. But then if you were to go back to 2013 and probably listen to those first times on the mic at the commentary, I would probably cringe even more out of my seat, because that was
Sure.
literally me just experiencing, first of all, live feedback from audience. Second of all, you're having a conversation with somebody live. And one of the things about a podcast, about commentary, is it is a conversation. And knowing like what you want to say and when to pass is extremely important. And I'm going to do the good guest thing here, and I'm going to pass. I'm not going to keep talking past that. But I think like commentary was that those hours put in of getting comfortable of like, what is my voice as a presenter? What is my voice on the internet as well? Like the fact that people can speak, like I used to, do debate and speech and stuff and model UN. One of those things about that is you'd go up and you'd sit down and you wouldn't get feedback. Online
Yep.
you're getting feedback immediately. So you kind of have to decide like, what are you willing to put as part of your voice, what are you willing to take criticism for, and like what is kind of the purpose of putting your voice out there. And I sort of had maybe a more strong vision of that because I was coming from outside of these worlds. But some people I know are like just doing it straight from a passion for gaming as well. That's also like an important element of it as well.
Yeah, I totally feel that with you. Like one of the, I did like a live show remote in 2015 that I like kind of just produced with some buddies, and like I haven't watched those VODs. It's probably terrible.
Yeah.
But really,
But you probably
Smash
put a lot of
commentary.
work in it, right? You probably
Yeah,
put a lot of work in it.
100%. I was like freelance journalist and doing that at the same time, and I had also had a sort of passion for that, and then also Smash commentary, which I got to do a little bit with JV and Neptune, who
Nice.
are very successful in Dallas Fort Worth, and now do two very different things. We work a lot with Neptune's company AOE, and I still talk to JV quite frequently. Good people, but yeah, it's just funny to think about like the development. I'm in the middle of this like almost career reinvention, changing what I'm focusing on a little bit, and like people are discovering me for the first time. I'm glad they're discovering me now after like almost half a decade at ESPN and like a lot of like
Right,
formal
right,
presentation stuff. I've learned a lot, so
right,
it's I
right.
totally like empathize with where you're at, so
Yeah.
and understand where you're coming from.
I'll also say shout outs to Yipes and TK Breezy and EE, who are all big influences on me as a voice. And also I would say on the podcasting side, there was Tracy Clayton and Heaven Nagatu of Another Round. Those are like my big influences on what kind of voice I wanted to put out there. Even though mine is very much my own, those people really influenced me.
So when did you start doing journalism? And you said you were at BuzzFeed first, and then you started doing more journalism. Like, what was that transition like? And what was your ultimate goal at the time?
Sure. Yeah. So I was in grad school in 2012, 2014 when I started getting into competitive gaming. It wasn't just Smash, it was also Ultimate Marvel. So I was like doing a lot of different things. I was kind of figuring out my life. And I just started blogging. I started doing this blog, Rad Brown Dads. And it was kind of like funny, but it was also kind of cultural history of like South Asian immigrants, Muslim immigrants, African, Asian immigrants. Like it's like other non-South Asian, non-Muslim people got intrigued by it and started submitting. Like Hassan Minaj apparently was a reader of it. He like name dropped it like in one of his
That's awesome.
Patriot Act. Like
I'm a
he
huge fan of his. Yeah.
yeah, he told the story about his dad, and he was like, it was a real, like how his dad was like really sweet to him. He was like, it was a real radbrowndads.tumblr.com moment. That was like a blog I did for like 2-3 years in grad school. So I wasn't enjoying grad school because of the lack of feedback and community engagement. Grad school is really great if you want to become an expert in something and really unbreak the way you currently think about things in lazy ways. That's super useful. But I didn't, as a career, I found it too siloed. So like I was enjoying blogging, and as a result I like completed my master's degree in Islamic studies and was like, how can I use these skills and spread it like I did Rad Brown Dads? And I started applying to online journalism fellowships, Mike, Bustle, BuzzFeed. For whatever reason, BuzzFeed was like the only one that gave me an interview, and they liked that I had both of those things, the kind of the academic reporterly stuff that could come from grad school, like that expertise, but I also was like, kind of a comedian, online writer type person. I would say
Yeah.
comedian, but like, I could I could be accessible as well. So that
Yes.
combination brought me in there, and then everything else I learned on the job. I literally learned everything about journalism on the job, and it was the right fit for me, honestly. Like, it allows me to be versatile, which I don't want to, like you said, food journalist, commentator, podcast host. It's like these things don't all necessarily go together, but it's because it, like, this career allows me to do all of that, and people come because they have, for whatever reason. I'm very blessed to say that, like, people sometimes care about what I'm thinking about, and it's truly, I'm writing about it or presenting about it because it's something that I'm thinking about and I want to have a conversation about.
It seems like to me, through the through line through a lot of the work that you've done, whether that be the podcast, see something, say something that you hosted at BuzzFeed, some of the stuff that you're doing now with the Radiolingo project, which I want to talk about in more depth later, and even the tagline, the blog, everything, it's all connected to your culture and explaining the culture that you have.
Yeah.
Whether that be, you were mentioning earlier about your dad being, the Rad
The
Brown
Rad Brown
Dad's tag.
Dad.
Yeah, exactly. The tag came from your father in admiration of your dad. So
Yeah.
walk me through the importance of sharing that with other people, because I think, the one thing is, I have a lot of friends of sort of minority background, whether that be in color or in religion, and I know that for them it can sometimes be tough to be so open and vulnerable talking about those things, and also just sharing it with others, because it's so
Right.
like it's held really close in communities, because everybody's very bound together. So talk to me about, like, opening up of that and making it a
Sure.
big part of your public identity as well as your private identity.
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, it's authentic. I mean, it is who I am. Second of all, I was thrust into that spotlight at a very young age, by my parents. And in some ways, I kind of accepted that burden and rejected it. And I'll explain really quickly what I mean with a short story, which is that my parents, when 9/11 happened, they were like, nobody knows who we are as people. They think we are terrorists. And, we've been a community here in mid Michigan for, decades, and we have a lot of beliefs that are in common with everyday Americans. And so, like, I visited a lot of churches and did a lot of community outreach
Mm,
and schools, and, like, I gave a speech in front of my school, and I actually did not like that feeling. I did not like that feeling of, I have to explain myself. I have to
mm,
explain who I am, what I believe. I have to tell you I'm human. That really bothered me because I would spend a lot of time and energy, and it was clear from the audience that maybe some people got it, but they were open to it, and the people that were not open to it still, like, thought I might know where Osama bin Laden is, for instance. That was one of the questions I remember when I was 13, is like, somebody in the audience asked me where Osama bin Laden was. And everyone unlearns their biases and bigotry in their own time. But for me, it was important to not focus on that. It was more important to tell the story of who I am and the people I come from and the community I come from, and not to explain, but to sort of give depth through storytelling. And so that's why I do a lot of reporting and first person narratives as well, because I think perspective is influences everything. I've seen the ways in which white American perspectives have been made to be invisible, like they're the neutral thing. And to me, like, it's not neutral. I don't,
it's
and I
true.
don't. It's like, I'm watching Love Is Blind, and everyone is talking about all these marriage traditions, like the daddy daughter dance, and I was like, to me, this is still not my culture, and that's fine that it's other people's culture, but it's not a neutral thing, right? Like, everyone has their own
Yeah.
thing. So all I just try to recenter my narratives around the things that I saw growing up and that were normal to me, as opposed to trying to say, hey, I'm human, and, like, trying to kind of explain myself. I try to tell stories. And that's also the kind of media that I'm attracted to as well. And I think it's more effective. You're more, not that, like, I don't, if somebody is less hateful as a result of my work, that's great, but I don't really care if they're not, because, hey, it's not my job to stop somebody from being like, bigoted in any way.
Yeah, I think, what's really interesting too, and this kind of moves us into the next part of the conversation, is that, I'm a big fan of Jason Rezaian, the Iranian American journalist who was wrongly imprisoned in
Right.
Iran for 544 days. I've got his book on my shelf. I've read through it. I listened to his entire narrative podcast that he did, actually co-produced by Crooked, and
That's on my
was
list.
something.
Sadly, I haven't listened. I'm sorry, but I
It
know his story.
Yeah, and one of the things that he sort of has talked about a little bit is that he was very close with Anthony Bourdain, and Bourdain Books actually published his book, even though that's not the traditional book that they usually publish in that style, talking about his imprisonment. And something he talked about, I went and met him and his wife Yegi at a speaking event in New York when the book came out as well. And something that they spoke about was sharing that culture, normalizing that culture, giving it a voice through food, and that
Mhm.
Bourdain had done that with them with all of his shows before his passing. And I think that in your work and some of the work that you've done, like food is something everybody likes food. Nobody doesn't like food, right? And so exploring culture through food, I think, is really intriguing.
Yeah.
I guess like what is drawn you to do that in some of your work more broadly, to use food as that sort of centerpiece?
I mean, you nailed it, honestly. Like, it's that's a big reason why, is because everybody can understand through food. It's a basic fundamental human need that we all share, and you also get exposed to so many different things as a result of food. For me in particular, Muslim as a category is a complicated category. It is not
Mm-hmm.
a racial category. However much people try to make it a racial category, it's not a racial category. It's a religious category. So the thing
Correct.
when so I had done a lot of work representing Muslim culture, but I was always a little hesitant about it because no matter what you platform a certain kind of voice, other things are being minimized. In any conversation about American Muslims, you have to think about the fact that like some significant proportion is converts, Black American. That we have people who are religious minorities like Shia or Ahmadi, and as a journalist, like I'm neutral on like what the Muslim experience is. I can't say like a Sunni Pakistani Muslim is a Muslim. All those people are kind of equally have a claim to the story of Muslims. So it was really challenging for me to do conversational podcasts about this because there always felt like no matter what conversation was happening, there was a voice missing. There were several voices missing. So the nice thing about food is that you can focus on one, a religious category. There's this category of halal, which is deeply misunderstood in America.
Correct.
It's not a cuisine, it's a religious categorization of slaughter of meat. It refers to the meat, and maybe like alcohol also.
Preparation too, like the handling of things and making sure that they abide by somewhat of a certain guideline.
Sure, it's not as strict as kosher, right? Because
Yes.
like it's not as strict as that. But sure, like if the meat is cooked in alcohol or bacon, like that would stop it. Even if it was slaughtered in a halal way, that would certainly make it not halal. So as a category, it's a very interesting journalistic category and an underreported one. And that's kind of one of my pivots that I want to do, Jacob, is finding the right platform in which I can report on halal food in America. And to be honest, it's been hard. It's been really hard to find, despite like a lot of success in other venues. It's been really hard to find a place where I could dig into this religious category of food, where like you can get at the diversity of American Muslim culture through food, like Bourdain did, which I also appreciate so much about his shows. I learned so much about some of those communities I report on through Bourdain, through food, like watching his Senegal trip was really eye opening for me. Watching his Turkey trip was really eye opening for me because they really made me question, as somebody who has reported on American Muslims for so long, what does it mean to be a Muslim when these different ways of being that I can't always represent. So yeah, I mean, Bourdain is the goal. I would like to get there one day, of course, but I know everyone says that, but like, he did it well. He did it well and I still give him his props. Recipes.
Incredibly open-minded. It was never
Yeah,
about, a lot of the food programming content, etc., is about like shock and awe. Like
yeah.
another person that I watch, as she tweeted yesterday, happy birthday to Gordon Ramsay, is Trisha Esberty, who is a Twitch streamer that does cooking shows. She got invited on one of Gordon Ramsay's shows that he judges people food, and
Oh no.
he asked like what she does for a living, and she's like, I stream my cooking show on Twitch, and he's like, what the fuck is Twitch? Like this, it's like this like very memeable moment of
Yeah,
like Gordon Ramsay going, what the fuck is Twitch?
that's great.
And that's shock and
Sad
awe. Like that's
and
the
sad.
shock and awe
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
Not sort of like the more, not the like, let me explore this. I like the Bourdain style and sort of all its derivatives, like exploring culture through food. I think
And
that's very
importantly,
unique.
he did not punch down. That's the other thing about
Always.
Bourdain that was so good. He was always willing to take a fight with somebody who had power and deserved it, which is, as journalists, something we should always be aware of. And he was always willing to bring up people who weren't necessarily centered. And that's something that I also take in my work. I try to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what sticks with me. Hearing like Jason speak about Bourdain's trip to Iran when they were there is sort of, this is somebody he like interfaced with and got to come and try Iranian food with, Persian food with, and then one of the last dying wishes was to publish his book, which is just like incredible. I mean, like you can't, yeah, like, and was a supporter throughout the entire imprisonment alongside the people at the Washington Post, etc. It's just like those principles are really, you don't think food journalism is that deep and serious necessarily. You just think food, right? I don't think people understand the nuance behind it. And I appreciate that there was someone in that category that really made it
Yeah.
outward in their personality, demonstrated well.
Well, I think doing anything, any kind of creative stuff well is hard, and you have to put a lot of work into it. And you know that it's good when you see the best example of it, and we should all strive to that. But like, it's hard not to feel let down when others don't rise to that Bourdain level. And I'm hard on myself. I feel like I have a lot to work on, and I think that kind of ambition that he had was really incredible. There's something else I wanted to tell you, which is on Rezayan, that another way in which my work intersected with him is I did this podcast about Muhammad Ali's faith journey for PRX and America Abroad Media. And he gave this great piece of tape about how Muhammad Ali speaking on his behalf was like, and trying to advocate to get him um, out of his imprisonment was like such a buoy to his spirits.
Yes.
And Muhammad Ali is another one of these people who has like this universal kind of appeal of always fighting for the little guy and advocating for a universal kind of notion of humanity, while also being specific to his own identity as a Black Muslim American. Like, you can do both. You can both be specific about your own story and tell it, but also connect to people of all different backgrounds.
You were talking about Islam being not a monolith, and that it is splintered and different in the way, there are Muslims from different cultures from the countries that their ancestors come from in
Yeah.
Muslim Americans, whether it be Iranian, Pakistani, Indian. We've talked about several different people on here. Jason Razayan, a Iranian American Muslim, Hassan Minhaj, a Indian American Muslim, right? Like various different people with different cultures. And yes, there is some overlap, but at the same time, everything is very different. And I think that sort of delineating, I think it can be very hard for Americans out of ignorance to delineate from the different cultures in their way. And so I admire the work you're doing to sort of give the voice and also be very specific in your direction, Pakistani American Muslim experience, food,
Yeah.
culture, etc. Did you ever receive blowback from people of other country backgrounds, ancestry backgrounds, for the work that you were doing and not representing that experience in the way that they saw fit correct?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, anytime we had a conversation between 3 or 4 people, many times people would say that they didn't feel represented. And I did as much. One of the things you might know, Jacob, about production is you plan for the best and hope for the worst. And sometimes you have a perfect panel that's like diverse and has a
Yep.
good mix of people, and then 2 people back out, one person backs out, and the audience doesn't know that, and you have to do your best to kind of represent those voices while also um you know uh acknowledging that there's some complications. And then also, I think on the other hand, one thing that I will say that I got some pushback, as opposed to national background, I think one of the big pushbacks is on religiosity and minority groups. There's more
Mm,
than, I think, mostly, meaning Shia and Ahmadi Muslims, these kind
yes.
of religious minorities that are, like, I'm a Sunni, I'm of the majority. I'm like, I always joke that like I'm basically like, as far as American Muslims go, I'm like a white guy. Like, I just am neutral. Like, I'm a Pakistani Muslim man, like Sunni, like I'm quite neutral in many ways. That's how people would like it to be. That's how people who other Pakistanis often think of their own community. They don't consider other voices. So a lot of the pushback was about the focusing on queer Muslims who, regardless of whether or not you agree with that on a religious level, they exist and they're a major part of our American landscape. They're having a big impact, and reporting on it is important. on highlighting Shia or Ahmadi Muslims. Like I have definitely faced pushback there, and we've seen that there has been a lot of um, just desire to control what the narrative is from within the community, and I just try to fight against that as much as I can. It's not. I don't always do the best job because it's not easy, but I always I try my best.
In terms of what you're doing now, the Radiolingo show was just announced between Duolingo and Crooked that you are hosting. What is the objective of the show at a broad level?
Sure. So Duo and Crooked have, I think, two amazing brands that really just fit well together. Duo has done so much work on the science of language and spreading the love of learning language. And Crooked, of course, has done a lot of really incisive commentary and reporting. And I think bringing those together with language as the basis is going to change a lot of minds. I think we have a lot of preconceptions and biases around language. Like if we have challenged a lot of our racial biases, our gender biases, our class biases, language is tied up in all of that. The bias that we kind of are have all been raised with by our educational system, by the cultural groups we're in. That's something that we can really interrogate, and it can help make a more inclusive world. And that's part of, I think, why I wanted to do this, because for me, linguistics and language was very liberatory in learning like how connected humans are in general, but also how unique they are. And then on the other hand, there's that kind of like serious thing, but it's also for me like the ability to highlight lots of different unique stories of human resilience, human like humor. That is also part of the goal. So it's a little bit of both. Each episode has a different focus. We have one, like for instance, on the challenge I have of getting people to say my name correctly and whether there is such a thing as a way to say my name correctly. Spoiler alert, I don't think there is a one correct way to say my name. We talk about, accents and the biases we have against, like, for instance, the Midwestern accent, which I grew up with, the Michigan accent. People often feel they don't have an accent. And that's very interesting to me because I noticed they had an accent that was different from my own. Gender bias. Like we have a lot of different ways of getting into this. And then we also have had some fun. Like there's this episode about the subtitling industry. And I know a lot of people hate dubs, but I digged into the dubbing industry of both like mainstream TV and movie shows, but also like a little bit of anime. And I kind of came away from it like really loving dubs. Like I know a lot of gamers are like no dub, sub only, but I
Yeah.
was like, wow, it's like not an easy thing to do what they're doing. And we have an episode
Mm.
about that as well.
Well, the
So
pacing is super hard, of course, right? Like being able to like fit in the pacing when you translate language,
yeah,
because like the way you say something in one, and if you were saying like anime, Japanese versus English, and being able to like make Japanese pacing in English language, right? Like it is super tough. I admire
yeah,
that a lot. The people
so
that do that work.
hard. So
Yeah.
hard. So yeah, we're trying to take shoot a wide net. The way, like, a lot of my favorite podcasts are variety shows, they're magazine shows. You get something different and interesting. Obviously I'm the host and I kind of guide you through my perspective to some extent. And what's fun about that is like I did get to dig into some of the questions I had about languages that I speak, and I learned a lot through it. And I'm really proud of what we came out with. I'm excited for everyone to listen to it.
How much of the show is going to be reporting versus personal experience?
It's very minimally personal experience. It's mostly reporting, interviews, relying on expertise of scientists and professors. We talk to a lot of linguistics professors. Um, so I think to the extent that it informs the story, I bring in the personal. But like that first episode about my name, like that's an unusual episode. I When I
Yeah.
pitched that to them, I was like, I don't want them all to be about me, but I think this is an interesting way to get into the way in which language kind of shapes so much of our experience in the world. And but it's really more the exception than it is the rule.
And how did the show come to be? What is the pitch story here?
So I think Crooked and Duo had come together and seen that there was some alignment, and I pitched them a couple of episode ideas in some early conversations, and they liked what I had come up with. There wasn't like, I think part of the reason it's me is because I worked in the podcast industry and have experience making narrative shows, meaning like, as opposed to this where we're like sitting down and talking one on
Correct.
one. You're writing a script, you're writing you're thinking about how to use ambient audio or found tape to enrich the script. You are figuring out when to stop using one voice and use another. Like these are kind of the skills that I've picked up in radio. So that was kind of why I think I mean, I don't know who else was interviewed for it, but I just know that like they liked my ideas, and you know, we put together that pilot, and they really love that pilot, which is the one about the names, which is still the first episode of the series. And you know, what's exciting about it too is it's their first partnered podcast that Crooked has done. It's their first, and I
Yeah.
believe also Duo has not really dug into this space in English narrative podcasts in the same way. They have some podcasts and other. You have to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not so sure on that.
I
But
think they don't have a narrative podcast. They have sort
right,
of like talk style
yeah,
stuff that's self-published that they
yeah.
publish themselves.
So for both of them, it's a new kind of territory that's exciting, and it's really cool to work with a client like Duolingo because they have a lot of expertise. You know, like there are
Yep.
questions that they thought to ask in my scripts that I would have, in a typical journalistic fashion, wouldn't have been dug into by a typical editor. But they have that expertise where they could really dig into some of that nuance, the science. You know, we're really focused on trying to make science a big part of this.
That's really interesting. I on the narrative podcast side, please send me your brain power now that you're done with it, because I'm in the middle of like writing and narrating podcast that's going to be coming out next year. So it's this is the next like 8-9 weeks for me. So please send the brain power across the screen.
I'm happy to do a call and talk about it. I love that's like it's so weird. I fall into the space. I don't know how I fell into this space. Like I'm a writer. Like I'm now writing narrative podcasts. This is very interesting. It's kind of, but I'm also like on the side doing, like, as you know, like maybe we'll talk about this, is like probably one of my big passion projects was that piece I did for Eater about mangoes that won me the James Beard Award. It's like it's just funny. Like I have these different tracks, and it's you know, but surprisingly, I think like most of my day is now spent not writing for print, but writing for audio, writing narrative scripts for audio. So yeah, happy to you know, give you any feedback or, you know, help in any way.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's the one category I'm most obsessed with in podcasting more broadly. I think a lot of people are, but
Yeah.
you know, I've fallen down the rabbit hole of so many of them, like Serial being among the first in the category,
Yeah.
right? And then
Classic.
like going down it more recently. I'm trying to remember which one I finished most recently. The one that's most memorable in like the past year or like 18 months for me is Exit Scam, the Aaron Lammer podcast, from not from the Pineapple People, but not the Pineapple People. It wasn't like
Yeah.
exactly produced by Pineapple Street, but it was incredible podcast. You guys should go listen to that, because
Yeah.
especially in the wake of the FTX news, it's a Canadian crypto exchange that like its founder died and all the money was gone.
Oh,
And
I know about that story, but I didn't know the podcast. That's a
yes,
very funny story.
it's there's a podcast about it, and there's been a lot of speculation about whether he actually died, and they sort of dig into that. So
Oh, okay,
yes,
right. Yeah, I'm not that
yes,
caught up with that, but now I'm interested. Good. That
yeah,
was
go
a good
listen to
pitch for
Exit
that.
Scam, people. Aaron's a good dude too. I appreciate, and my fellow past Brooklynites, all of us. So the one thing I want to ask, because I'm dealing with this in my career now, and I'm sure you have a little bit too, and maybe do, or maybe you don't. Maybe you're one of the lucky one of us. But is Richard Lewis was on the show, the controversial esports journalist, about a week and a half ago. And something he said is the big thing when you have an audience, because he's trying to transition out of esports and go into other things. He hosts a show about called I Hate It Here, where he like reads news headlines from around the world that are just like crazy and whatever, and reacts to them in real time. And the one thing he said is like basically talking about how intoxicating it is to have an audience. And when you do a career pivot, you change the topic or whatever, being fearful of losing it. You know, your work has spanned, again, there is that narrative through line of culture and sharing your culture in your work, but it's been, like you said, it's a little different. Everything's a little bit different, and you've had a lot of success in some things. You were talking about the piece from Eater. Does it worry you when, especially being sort of like a Swiss Army knife freelancer, does it worry you that like the next thing's not going to be as successful as the thing that you had done previously? Do you get a little bit of that imposter syndrome?
I try not to think about it, which is probably not a very good career strategy. But you know, I think first of all, I was staff for 4 years, right? I was staff at BuzzFeed, and now I've been probably freelance for 4 years. And one of the things that I found when I was staff is you have to hit a quota, you have to hit a certain amount of pieces, and I would write about a lot of things I don't care about. And sometimes they were good. Sometimes the things that I didn't really care about were like, I like look back, I was like, well, it's good. It was like good to be pressured to like write, a certain amount of stuff that you need to do. On the other hand, now I'm at a place where I can mostly choose what I want to do, and what I've kind of come at it from a career perspective, whereas I think a lot of people have to think about it like what you're describing from like I want to say an influencer or like a creator perspective. Like there's no doubt that I have had to dig into creator tool sets to some extent, like
Hmm.
in order to succeed. But what I've done, instead of like trying to make that my primary thing, I don't want to develop an audience. That's not what I'm interested in doing. So I've been lucky enough because I was at BuzzFeed, I started my podcast there, and then I left and was able to contract the skill sets that I had developed, that I haven't had to worry about audience development. Now, at a certain point, there's a very real possibility that people get sick of what I'm saying, people get sick of my work, and I don't get contracts anymore. That could happen, obviously. I'm hopeful it's not, but for now, it's been working where I can focus on the things that I want to do, and which is like writing, focusing on honing my voice, highlighting other people's voices who I think the world should know about in the context of the companies that I'm working with, and less on the audience stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that I won't ever go in there, but I think one of the traps about online creators that we have is that all of these platforms want us to give up their labor for free. They want
Yep.
us to develop audiences for them, and we are making nothing out of it. I started early in my career doing a little bit of that, but I pivoted quickly to working in industry. And the problem with industry, of course, in journalism, as you know, is that layoffs are very prevalent. Stability is
Hmm.
very hard to find in this world, which is really a shame because it's had a big impact on our democracy, on our world. Like it would be great if we had like a well-funded media sector. And not startup VC funded, like it's a public good we should all care about. So, I have just, to the extent that I can, I've stayed contracted as a specific, like in a very narrow sense, but while still doing all the things that I like to do. And it's been a really nice ride so far, and I hope it doesn't end. But you're right that one day it could, and maybe I'll have to pivot to something else. But for now, it's working. So I'm gonna I try to have 1 or 2 year plans. I don't try to, like, with this world, I don't try to, like, like 10 years ago, Twitter would not get you a job, but Twitter got me a job now. So just keeping with short term plans for now is what I kind of do. Medium term, let's say.
I'm incredibly envious of that as someone who, yeah, I mean, it's, I can understand being in the position, almost 5 years at ESPN, like taking that swan dive and just being like, yeah, I'm gonna do my own thing, and that was like my immediate reaction on my last year at ESPN. So I feel that I can relate a lot. So
But
um,
it's been 10
yeah,
years, right? Almost 10 years of working on audience development and these skill sets. So it's not like it was like a rapid thing. It just lots of little things picking up over time. And I'm sure you're doing I come on, don't, you're underselling yourself.
no, 100%. No, we've grown this podcast on audio on demand. I'm so proud of the team. From like its second month had 2,000 plus listeners, which
Great.
is
Yeah,
incredible. So
that is
like,
great.
and on track to have like 4,000 this month, which is, or 4,000 or 5,000 this month. So most podcasts don't make it past like 100, much
Yeah.
less that
No,
this
no kidding.
far. So
No kidding.
yeah, it takes forever. Podcasts are a tough industry, but
They are.
hopefully unique nuance, and hopefully the show you're doing. I wish you all the luck with it. I
Fingers
will be
crossed.
listening.
Thank you.
I'm
Thank you.
very interested. I listen to almost everything Crooked does anyway, and they will get me to do so through their very well placed promos, bouncing people around within their network. So I'm sure I'll hear Radiolingo ads on on both pod saves, World and America. So
Yeah, you'll definitely
yeah.
hear 'em. I recorded some ads for sure, which is probably the thing that I have to work on the most. I really,
I hate it.
ads are hard to do. I admire people who
I
can do a good ad. Really.
I'm so happy that like audio is, you can jump cut an audio and people, and you can sell it where people don't know,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like I was filming something today, like behind me, and I was like set up camera on the desk, like all like set up in the background behind me, and I'm just like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this. Like I wasn't script reading, but I was just like, I hate like dead to camera. I'm way better at conversation. So
Also, complete non
yeah,
sequitur for the Twitter Spaces people, but I don't even know if you noticed. Am I pointing to the right place? The DDD. Ah,
yes,
right there. That was my main Twitter Spaces. People can't see that. Usually, I'm in like these podcast recordings and nobody would ever comment on that. But I feel like you're a rare person who might be like, yeah, look at the DDD.
Yeah, there's a King DDD for the people that can't see in his background. Yeah, he played DDD in Project Plus and Project M. So shout outs to DDD. I love and hate the character. I find it so funny, but it's also a pain in the ass to play against. So
Yep. Yep.
such is life.
That's how most people feel.
So I think Prem from my team had a question. And again, if you want to ask one, hit us with hashtag Visionaries podcast. Or request to speak if you're someone we know, because there are some people in here that we know and trust and don't need a vet that aren't random folks. But yeah, Prem, you want to go ahead with your question?
Hey, so as someone who I kind of like look forward to the couple Smash majors I get to every year, I really appreciate the kind of shared language, quote unquote, of gaming. And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on how some of the sounds, terms, and I guess things like voice lines that play a role in gaming, how they kind of build into this larger language that is shared across gaming cultures.
I was curious if we're going to talk about linguistics and gaming at all, because we didn't dig into it, but it's a great question about what are the things that are being developed online that didn't exist. Like, for instance, I mean, I'm not somebody who uses this, but like PogChamp. Like, what is PogChamp? Like, I would love for a linguist to like explain how PogChamp is it a category that existed before? Do you know what I mean? Like, as a category of words, like how is it a new category? The Twitch chat response, like just somebody saying PogChamp, like that's very interesting to me. And then of course there's all the slang that has like permeated the world, like the world of online gaming, like Scoops, Haagen-Dazs. Like, I mean, I love that like there's a language around there. But then the third thing that I think is really interesting is the subcultures of each gaming community's language. Sometimes you start a new game and you go to the subreddit or something and you're like, what are they saying? Is this English? Like, for instance, I don't know, Jacob, have you played Monster Train? Oh
I have
wow.
not.
Okay. Monster Train is like a Slay the Spire type game. I've played that game for about 20 hours. I don't understand anything of what they're saying. Like, just the grammar of it feels different. So I feel like it's probably going to be something that scientists will study eventually, but I think we're in the middle of it. But I would be very intrigued in like 50 years, the papers that people are going to be writing about PogChamp. Like, I feel like there's going to be a paper on PogChamp in 50 years, and like the Twitch kind of slang and reacts.
Yeah, I hate to admit this, but I had to scroll through an alt-right forum this morning to find a really awful image for something related to production work. And some of the slang there, I would also like to understand what it means, because those aren't places that I often scroll. And I'm just like, this is deeply uncomfortable. I don't know what these words mean, and they're probably not good things. So,
Yeah.
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 Yeah, linguistics when it comes to niche communities is always really interesting, be that gaming or other things. So, but we do have an audience question from JV, who I mentioned earlier. Shout out to JV, the Smash commentator turned marketer. JV, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, so first off, I hope I'm coming through okay. I'm in my car right now, driving to the grocery store. But I guess one thing that I really appreciate is seeing, um, brown people do things that is kind of outside of the path that's sort of been laid out by us. And this is like a touchy subject, so hopefully I'm saying this correctly. But it felt like my entire life. Um, I was kind of in this pipeline to ideally become like a doctor or like a lawyer or an engineer. And so when I decided to say screw all that and do what I'm doing in gaming and esports, it was kind of like a big shell shock for my family and also the community around me. So I guess my question is like, why aren't there like more people that look like us doing the things that we do, whether it's what you're doing in journalism and beyond, or like myself in gaming and esports?
Great question, and I think you articulated it, JV, really well. I will say this, which is, First of all, we're all a product of the history that we came from, and many of us are products of the immigration policy in this country. There was a need for more professionals, doctors, to come to this country, and the J-1 visa was very influential in bringing over many people. And who comes over, but professionals who are going to want to recreate the sort of class status that exists. Now, if you go to I spent a lot of time in college studying, kind of South Asian history, and I was. It's like it's not all doctors. Most of that history is not all doctors and engineers. Those are the people that came to America. So we're a result of that. And learning that history was very important to me, to know that like it's not an intuitive or normal. Like it's not abnormal to want to be an artist, to want to be a radio person, to want to be a journalist. Like I also think about my own mother, who was actually, rest her soul, she's passed away like 10 years ago. She wanted to be a journalist actually in the 70s in Pakistan, but it's not easy in any society being like a independent woman. And then she was in Pakistan in the 70s. Her family was like, the best goal for you is to go to medical school. That'll give you career stability and respect in a way that other things won't do. And you can do those other things as a hobby. But like, there's plenty of instances in our history of people doing other kinds of things. I think the doctor, engineer, lawyer thing is just a reflection of the immigration policy that brought the kind of people that were brought over. And my mother, to her kind of in the complexity, despite wanting to be a journalist herself, she wanted me to be a doctor as well. And she would probably be disappointed that I wasn't a doctor, even though I achieved the goal that she had wanted for herself. So it's a complicated thing. And I think, like knowing that there are other models is important, but also knowing that like we are the product of a certain kind of political and immigration history, and we can choose to break out of it if we want to. And it's not like a moral judgment either way, despite people wanting to shame us for people to be shamed for doing something different, or also for them to doing the things that their parents asked them to do. Both are perfectly acceptable options. As an old ass man now, I'm like, both are good. Like both things are fine. You can get your money or you can follow your passion. As long as you're doing right by your people, that's all that really matters.
We'll end on this question for me and follow up on that, because you're a dad,
Yeah.
and how do you think about that when you think about your children or child, and eventually maybe children, and how you'll kind of carry that influence and encourage them the way that you'll push them versus where your parents pushed you?
Yeah. What I learned from watching my parents' story and watching my own story is that all you can do as a parent is give your child the tools to choose, and they will make a decision that's best for their time that they live in, for the culture that they live in. My parents did things that their parents did not like. They got married and nobody approved of that marriage. So like the idea that like generations before us were like less rebellious or something, no. Like every generation has their own rebellion. My daughter, I'm sure, will do something that really confuses me. My goal is to just teach her about her history, about the people she comes from, about the values that are important, about universal ideas of justice and support for the underserved, and speaking up on behalf of people who need to be spoken up on behalf of, and love for food and like all the joyous stuff too, like how to have fun and show your love for other people in a way that's respectful and brings joy and sweetness to life. She will make the decisions with all that information, and it may confuse me, but I'm only there to guide her, and she will make her own path, much like I made my own path, much like my parents made their own path.
Well, I extremely admire that. Thank you for that, and that was a fantastic answer. So thank you for coming on the show. It's much appreciated. We wish you the best of luck with Radiolingo Pod when it's out, and starts releasing. And for everyone else, if this is your first time listening to the pod, we appreciate you being here. You can find the other episodes on YouTube at youtube.com/overcomegg. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Just type in, I think you can just type in Visionaries now, but if not, type in Visionaries Gaming and it comes up super quickly. We are the one that looks like a comic book now. We have a freshly refreshed cover that is very nice. Thank you, AOE Creative, for that. But thank you all for listening. Have a great rest of your evening, and thank you for coming on the show.
Can I make one plug
thing?
before
Go
we
ahead.
go?
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk and to connect with you. If you want to listen to Radiolingo, there's a link in my bio that you can click on. There's just a trailer out now. The show will release in about a week, November 15th. I'm bad with dates. I believe that's correct, even though I said it in a promo. But if you click on the link in my bio, you will find information on where to subscribe, and please listen in and let me know what you think. I work really hard on it. It's like a huge achievement for me, and I really hope it finds an audience, so please support it in any way that you can. And hopefully I'll see you all at a Smash tournament one day soon after my child grows up.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate y'all tuning in.
Thanks for watching Visionaries on YouTube. For more content, please subscribe to the Overcome channel.